This is True Hoops 11 a.m. daily weekday show. I think it's fair to say David Thorpe is super excited for today's guest, Jeff Asher. Jeff, how are you doing today?
I'm okay. Like everybody else, right?
Yeah. So you are the co-founder of Datalytics, which sometimes gets a little overwhelmed in your bio for the fact that you're a former CIA officer, and which just triggers in David and me 100 dumb questions about like from movies, basically.
Let's do it. Bring it on.
Okay.
I need a graphic of 100 dumb questions here.
Well, first, the basics. You worked at Langley for how long?
Yes. Yes, I worked at Langley. I was there 2008 to 2013, and then I moved back to New Orleans in 2013.
Okay. Which TV show or movie does the best job portraying real life at the CIA?
I mean, it's Office Space, sadly.
Come on.
It's a mashup of Office Space and Spies Like Us, the old Dan Aykroyd movie.
Is that what they make you say in the training?
No. You know, there's that meme where what my mom thinks and what my husband thinks and what my kids think, and then what I really do. And what I really do is always the Office Space picture.
Okay. How hard is it to get into the building to go to work in the morning?
I mean, if you work there, it's pretty ezy. You just drive and you show your badge, and then you go park. Parking is honestly the hardest part. So
it's like ESPN.
So if you park before 7 a.m., you can get at certain spots. But there's all this parking that is reserved for the sort of senior higher ups from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. So either you get there at 6:45 and you have a manageable walk, or you get there after 9 and you have a manageable walk. Otherwise, you're parking like on the moon.
Oh, that's
Henry, I don't want to gloss over the TV show answer. Are you saying that there isn't a lot of similarity between you and Jack Ryan going off with armed and attacking people, or can you just not talk about it?
Me and Jack Ryan, that's pretty much an autobiography of my life.
Right.
Most analysts and Jack Ryan, it's very different. So I was just sort of doing the median analyst type lifestyle.
Got it.
Very fair. Very fair. Right. What's the coolest gadget you're aware of?
Coolest gadget? Microsoft Excel 2013. My favorite is in the museum. The CIA has two museums, actually. And in one of them, there's a fish that they built. I don't even know if they ever used it or if it was just a prototype, but it was designed, you put it in an Iraqi river and it floats down the river. And if it reaches the sort of chemical plant or the nuclear plant and it detects a certain chemical, it responds to that chemical and tells you whether or not they're building nuclear weapons or they're building some sort of chemical weapon. And so
that's cool.
I don't know if they ever actually used it, but that's something that they show off as sort of the cool way that we were going to do intelligence.
So that means there's a room somewhere where they're devising fish and things like it.
And that was the old version, that was 25, 30 years ago. And so who knows what they got now.
I can tell you, this is now we're officially off the rails in this interview, but I once interviewed the head of the CEO of Qualcomm, and it was ostensibly an interview about how good the Wi-Fi was in the Sacramento arena, but somehow we went way off the rails, and he started telling me about how he redesigned his house because he was worried about miniature armed drones. And Qualcomm's a big military supplier, and he's like, I know stuff I can't even tell you, but like we're not having a sunroom anymore because little tiny things will shoot missiles at us. And I'm like, sir, what are you talking about? Like, I'm super worried about this.
No, I'm particularly concerned about those. But
Jeff, how accurate was the movie The Good Shepherd?
Fairly inaccurate. It sort of danced around some of the main characters that sort of started up the CIA, but for the most part, most movies are very, very unfair to reality. There's a handful that are okay, but most are pretty bad.
Well, what's the handful?
Oh yeah, we want to know this. This is what we want. Yeah.
So I like the movie Breach because it feels
amazing.
There's the scenes between Ryan Felipe and his wife are kind of annoying and not particularly useful, but the relationship between Eric O'Neill and Robert Hansen and the bureaucracy and Eric O'Neill was it wasn't like a shock to him that, I don't know if you've seen the movie, and now I'm spoiling it. It wasn't a shock to him that Robert Hansen was committing espionage, But a lot of it is very close, and it just sort of feels right. And I think that that's important, that it feels like a bureaucracy, and it's not like everybody's running around with pistols and everything. I can't really think of others right now.
Okay, it's all right. Breach is good.
Breach is good. I used a red pen. I wrote it down. That's my only note so far.
What other nations? Let's leave America out of it. What other countries do you think do a great job with their intelligence services?
I mean, the Brits for the most part, the Israelis, but they have a really tough neighborhood.
Yeah.
The Russians are up there as our biggest adversary. The Chinese are up there as our biggest adversary.
Anyone we wouldn't probably expect?
I mean, I don't know if you would expect this, but the Canadian services are extremely professional, and especially their SIGINT services are extremely capable. So I have a high degree of respect for the Canadian services.
And
How about
polite.
Pakistan?
And polite as well. I never really worked Pakistan, so I don't specifically know the answer. My impression is that they're generally capable, but not particularly trustworthy from our standpoint.
Yeah.
So,
What other basketball show is finding out about Pakistan's intelligence service?
Important.
You know, even there's a video of the Israelis killing a Hamas weapons dealer in 2010 that the Emirati services, the Emirati police department put together in 2010. And it's all of the surveillance video and showing how many and how they track them, and using all of these devices the Israelis are doing. And so you really think about, like, even if an Emirati police department can put together this type of tracking operation of a really sophisticated Israeli hit job, what can other services do? And so given technology, it doesn't take a lot of capability to really be first rate at being a pain in the butt for something like what the US is trying to do.
That's the name of your book, First Rate Pain in the Butt.
Not my kid, though.
What did you study in college, Jeff?
I studied government and history. I was a senior in high school on 9/11. And I just sort of decided I wanted to serve in some manner. And I was told to either go into the military or to go to grad school. And so I ended up going to grad school at GW and got a couple of internships in the federal government. And one day they were looking for a Russia analyst within CIA. And so I contacted them and got hired there. And it was very lucky. But sort of you just have to put your cards in and keep trying, because they get like 180,000 applicants a year. So
Oh my goodness.
every time anybody asks, you need a lot of luck, and you need to just keep trying and trying and trying, because unless you're the most interesting person in the world, it just takes a lot of luck and effort.
Well, thankfully I am. So you were an analyst, and we talked about this. Like, it's a very specific job. It's not the same as an agent. Can you talk to us just very big picture about how the agency works?
Well, so first off, I'm going to correct you that
Okay, good, perfect.
an agent is someone that commits espionage for the United States. So if we recruit somebody within the Russian government, that would be an agent.
Yeah.
Somebody that is an employee of an intelligence service is an officer. And so really, analysts are officers. Anybody that is an intelligence officer that does work for the CIA is an officer. When you talk about somebody that's going out and sort of your traditional thoughts of what would James Bond be, he would be a case officer, somebody that's going out and meeting assets, meeting agents on dusty streets and dark alleyways and doing sort of the really dangerous stuff. Analysts are usually headquarters based, but not always. And the case officer goes out and collects the actual raw intelligence. The Russians are organizing their military like this, or here are the Iranian nuclear codes. The analyst takes that information and tells the policymaker, what does it mean? So the policymaker in this case, the highest policymaker is obviously the president, but it could be the Secretary of Defense, it could be the Secretary of State, it could be the CIA leadership, it could just be the leadership of their unit. But at some point, the role of the analyst is to take all of the raw intelligence that we're collecting, that NSA is collecting, that FBI is collecting, and to turn it into, this is what it means. And it's very important not to be policy prescriptive. So you don't want to say, what you really should do is tell the Saudi king X, Y, or Z. What you have to say as an analyst is the Saudi king might be amenable to a message of X, Y, and Z. And we know this because we've listened to his intercepts.
So this is this thinking about thinking, right? You're looking at all this data and trying not to get hysterical or let your emotions get in the way, or biases or such, right? This is where this book, right? This is basically the Bible of
Yes, yeah, that's it. I have my copy that's Psychology of Intelligence Analysis. It's the book that they give all analysts there's a 4-month training program that they put all analysts through, where they teach you how to write, they teach you how to think, they teach you how to do critical thinking, and and it's not getting rid of your biases, but it's acknowledging that your biases exist and learning how to overcome them when you're doing analysis. And a lot of it developed after the 9/11, the 9/11 and Iraq WMDs, where the intel community basically failed. And they failed for generally different reasons on 9/11 and with the Iraq WMDs. The Iraq WMDs being a much more critical component of analysts failed. And we need to learn why the analysts failed and what we can do to prevent that failure going forward. And so a lot of that was implementing, thinking about thinking, and how do you acknowledge, because we all have biases, we all have priors. How do you acknowledge that those exist and avoid them from clouding your judgment into the future?
Do you want to, you've been teaching this, you were going to generously share some slides with us? Do you want
Yeah, so I stole these straight from
just say Langley, it's okay.
Yeah, Langley. No. I stole these straight from the Psychology of Intelligence Analysis.
Oh, nice.
And so it's a couple of images. David, I don't know if you're familiar with all of these, but if you aren't, you can look through them. Let's see what's going on here. There we go. So first one is how we perceive what we expect to perceive. I don't know if David, do you see what's wrong with each of these?
Well, I see the same thing in all three. Yeah.
Yeah. So the article is being repeated here. Usually when people see this the first time, and your viewers may see this, that you don't necessarily see that because
right.
You know what Paris in the spring. And so you overlook the fact that there's two does.
Right.
Here is how
two faces, yeah.
About how it's difficult to look at the same information from different perspectives. If you sort of concentrate your gaze up here, you see the younger woman looking away, and then if you concentrate your gaze down here, you'll see the older woman and her chin and her mouth right here. So how challenging it is to necessarily see them both, and once you see one, it's hard to see the other. So this is a challenge that I think has become popular, but I love teaching this because usually it helps fill like 30 minutes of class time in my class. Sit there, and none of the students want to give up ever. But the point is to connect all 9 dots here by drawing 4 lines, and you can't pick up your pen. Judy, do you want to give that a try, or?
Go, Judy.
Let me. I'll stop sharing here.
Okay.
So
you got a lot of tabs open, Judy.
So as you can see,
she hit the tabs.
Yeah. So that's basically what my students do.
Yeah.
For weeks on end or hours on end. There's actually 2 solutions to this. Let's see. One is you can. The point is that students, you don't think outside the box. So I tell you to only draw 4 lines, not pick out your pen, connect all 9 dots. I never said you can't leave the paper, you can't go around. And so here you do 1, 2, 3, 4, where you've gone past it and connect it. You can also do it where you go, there's no rule that you have to go through the center of each dot. So you can actually do it in 3 lines, 1, 2, 3 here. And then there's
like
another
Zorro.
Where you can you just keep your pen going and you circle the paper, and you fold the paper into a cylinder.
Wow.
I've never done that method, but the book highlights it, and I guess you actually need a piece of paper, so it's kind of hard to show that here. And then one of the key challenges for Intel analysts is this measuring the perceptions of uncertainty, and this is something that really came out of the Iraq WMD Commission, where there were lots of issues with the analysis. And of course, I'll go over some of the history if that might be helpful. But basically, fall of 2002, Congress asks the intel community for a national intelligence estimate, which is the highest level product that the intelligence community can produce, as far as, do the Iraqis have an active weapons of mass destruction program? And so the result was that the intel community came out with this report that said that they have a program. They're engaged in building weapons. They may get it in nuclear weapons in a few years. Here's all of our evidence. And then they also asked, are the Iraqis engaged in Islamic terrorism? And they found no. So they correctly answered that they're not engaged with Al-Qaeda. They weren't behind 9/11. And so the report was flawed for a couple of reasons. One, their priors were that Iraq had a WMD program, which was true. In the 90s, they did, and they tried to hide it. And then the inspectors went away, and they just assumed that continued. And so every piece of evidence they saw under the light of the Iraqis have a program, and so this is more evidence that they have it. There was also assets. There was a guy by the codename of Curveball who there were all sorts of issues with. He claimed to have worked on mobile biological labs, and the labs had, so they drew these labs, and it turns out that he was in Germany, and he was speaking to DIA, which is the Defense Intelligence Agency, but he wasn't actually speaking to DIA. He was speaking to the Germans because he hated the Americans. And so things were getting translated from Arabic to German to English, and so a ton of information was being lost. Turns out he was fabricating the whole thing, but none of this was making it into the actual intelligence reports.
But great code name.
Yeah, it was a good code name. And it's a terrible case. And so they had that. And then they had all of these aluminum tubes that the Iraqis were identified as developing. And they were way too sophisticated for use in anything they thought but some sort of centrifuge program. And so this is more evidence that they have a nuclear program. They're procuring all of these really sophisticated tubes. They can't be for anything. It must be for a nuclear program. And there was some dissent within the intel community, but they didn't know exactly what it was for. It turns out that basically Iraqi generals were so terrified of being shot and killed by Saddam that they were going above and beyond in the artillery tubes they were procuring. And so they were getting these tubes that were way too sophisticated. And we basically weren't showing any of this uncertainty in there. Everything was matching with what the priors were. And so one of the graphs that I like in Hoyer's is expressing this level of uncertainty. And so here you can see that you have to be very specific in your language, because here they asked, I think, 20-something experts, when I say a statement, what does that really mean? What percentage would you assign to it? And it shows that for the most part, some of the statements, like almost certain, everybody's thinking, okay, 80, 90, 100% chance. Chances are slight, usually highly unlikely, 0 to 10%. So we understand those terms. But all of the other terms, when we say probable and likely and probably and we believe, there's a huge amount of spread in terms of what the policymaker and the experts actually hear. And so that's something that as we express this uncertainty, we need to be very careful about. And then there's the hindsight bias that I think is important to go into. Here they told a whole bunch of experts that something would happen, and they assigned probabilities. So first they weren't told what the outcome actually was. And generally they assigned these top row probabilities of about 33%, 21%, 32%, and 12%. That's what they thought the actual probabilities of what would happen was. And then they started to tell them what the outcome actually was, and they assigned the probabilities in retrospect. And so when they were told that outcome 1 was what actually happened, they said there was a 57% chance of it happening, versus when they weren't told it was a 33%. And so as you can see, that it's something that, especially as we discuss the politics and ramifications of our response to the coronavirus, it's important to remember that we're going to think that whatever happened was much more likely to expect to happen than it actually was at the time.
I'm thinking today, this is a little bit like everybody knew a shooting guard could lead a NBA dynasty when Michael Jordan was drafted, right? But of course, at that time, nobody knew that, right?
Exactly. And yeah. And some of the things like, maybe Jordan over Sam Bowie and
right.
And Durant over Greg Oden, you can look at and be like, okay, you should have had the hindsight to at least know not to make that mistake, Portland Trail Blazers. But a lot of the times it's like, why did Steph Curry go so late? Why did, especially since we're in draft season now, every time, if everybody knows that what the hindsight is, but it really is an extreme bias in analyzing everything.
The Blazers fan in me is just delighted that noted CA analyst Jeff Asher says that we were right.
Well,
not with Sam Bowie. I'm sorry. That was like the Iraq War. I saw Sam Bowie play in college. He should not have gone number 2.
David, we're moving on. Okay, Jeff's in the middle of an important presentation.
So the solution to all of this that the CIA uses are these things called structured analytic techniques. And they're ways of looking at data that or evidence that are designed to help you confront what your biases are. And so the one I have here from the book is called an analysis of competing hypotheses. There's actually software that you can get for free that does this. The idea is that you want to pick you put all your hypotheses on the table, and you want to pick the correct one based on the one that has the least amount of evidence that refutes it.
Right.
And so what you do is you so the question here is, will Iraq retaliate for the U.S. bombing of its intelligence headquarters? And your 3 hypotheses are that Iraq will not retaliate, it will sponsor some minor terrorist actions, or it will plan a major terrorist attack, perhaps against the CIA installation. And so you put out your hypotheses, and then you go through all of your pieces of evidence. So here we have 6 pieces of evidence, and you give it one of 5 grades, essentially: a plus, a double plus, a neutral, a negative, and a double negative, based on whether or not the pieces of evidence refutes or confirms each piece of each hypothesis. So Saddam said that he isn't going to retaliate. Well, that means very little, but it doesn't refute any of these. And so you go through each of these, and then you go down and you get, to evidence piece number 6, assumption that failure to retaliate would be unacceptable loss of face for Saddam. Well, that really goes against the hypothesis that he won't do anything. And then it confirms the other 2 hypotheses. And then you count it up, and then you get 4 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, that are against the hypothesis number 1, 0 that are against hypothesis number 2, and then 2 that are against hypothesis number 3. So if you were to do this analysis and you had 30 or 40 pieces of evidence, that would tell you that hypothesis 2 is your most likely hypothesis, that it will sponsor some sort of minor terrorist action. And so there's all sorts of different types of structured analytic techniques, starting at brainstorm and all the way up to really sophisticated, that are designed to force analysts to confront their biases and to not let their priors take over, and to let the analysis go from there.
I interviewed this NYU psychologist, Jay Van Bavel, who is writing a book and is very busy and has a pandemic, so he's not on the show right now, but super brilliant guy. But we're in a New York coffee shop, and I'm like, this shorthand of system 1, system 2 of our brains, right? So like the quick emotional one versus the slow reasoning one, right? And I'm just like, well, is one system or the other better at divining the truth, right? And he was like, yes. I'm like, well, which one? And he's like, 2, right? So this book to me feels very much like, you're in a room just trying to, like, this device that you just showed us is a way to get out of system 1 into system 2, it feels like to me.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of evidence that the more information you get at a certain point doesn't necessarily become helpful. There's an example from the book where they asked all of these sports bettors to choose which horse they thought was going to win, and basically, like, their confidence level shot up the more information they had about the horse, the track conditions, the horse's weight, how the horse was eating, but the results didn't actually change. And so basically we have to be more sophisticated in how we think. It's not necessarily always about how much information you're gathering. It's how you're examining yourself and how you think about things.
Yeah, I like the 9 dot thing too, because as a coach, I took a class about this kind of stuff when I was in college in the 80s. And when I was thinking about playing against a team that I thought was going to give us a lot of trouble, the idea was, well, I don't want to do what everyone thinks I'm going to do, what everyone always does. And it hasn't worked. And I was just talking to Henry before we came on air here, without going into detail about any particular game, the coaches that come up with a press, or think about Nick Nurse with a box and 1 and triangle and 2, which is just never seen in a postseason game, much less the finals. That gives you a significant advantage. And later on, we talk about the virus. I'm wondering what maybe else can be out there that hasn't really been explored, that might be a way to handle some of these things instead of just the most traditional thing possible, besides just the quarantine, which is obviously effective.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the challenge, is that we know that the quarantine is effective, but we also know that it's got sort of a shelf life to it.
Right.
And at some point, once you sort of get rid of the new cases, it gets less and less effective. So if new cases aren't growing, we know that we have to sort of come back in some way. And I think the challenge here is that nobody actually knows what the best way to do it. And in this way, we're kind of fortunate that a lot of the Asian countries are doing some of that experimentation for us. And hopefully we get ideas and we improve. And obviously what we know now in late April is going to pale in comparison to what we know in October about how to handle this.
Great point.
And
so Jeff, sorry, go ahead.
I just say it's amazing the degree of humanity that's working on this one problem. And when have we ever had this before? Really, the major world wars is the only time you can think of that like everybody was.
So sorry. you know these things you've just been explaining to us, and then you've been living in New Orleans as data has been applied in haphazard ways for all of us. And you've been sort of mounting a project to deploy some of this knowledge in fighting coronavirus. Can you talk to me about what you've been doing?
Yeah, so I'm a consultant with the New Orleans City Council, doing public safety stuff. And so when our case is New Orleans, nobody had surveillance of this. And so we didn't know the degree to which it was spreading in the community around Mardi Gras. And Mardi Gras was an ideal vehicle for it to spread. And so we were sort of on the unlucky end of the cities that caught it bad initially, and so didn't have the luxury of that advance warning to shut things down. And so really, as cases were going, the Department of Health here has been great about providing information, but one of my complaints was that they're only providing today's look. And it doesn't really matter how many cases or deaths you had. It really matters that curve. It matters, and each death is a life and tragic. But for us to know how we're doing, it doesn't really matter what the score is today. It matters what it's been in the past and then we can project maybe what it will be. And so I created a dashboard on the City Council's website, and really just tracking each piece of information that comes in on my Twitter account, because we've got this thing that each single source of information is imperfect. But if we combine, we've got cases, but cases have a backlog because of tests, and tests have a backlog that it takes a couple of days to run them. And then, they were running, and we don't know necessarily when tests were taken. We only know when they were reported. We've got deaths, but deaths have an extreme backlog, and all of the coroner's offices here are badly overworked. And so, they reported something like 120 deaths in one day statewide, which was our biggest figure. But something like half of them were 3 or more days old, or more than 3 days old. And so how do you really understand what the curve is? They're reporting now cases by date of onset, which is great, but they don't want to get ahead of themselves. So they're only doing that through April 7th. And so that's really our best effort at knowing what the trend is, but it's 12 days old. And so really with this, it's a lot like Intel analysis in that, and Henry, you tweeted my quote out and scooped. But one of the things they told us in training was that in doing Intel analysis is like doing a puzzle where you don't actually know what the picture on the box looks like. And so how do you know when you actually got the puzzle right and when you've actually completed it? And so the Intel analysis here is trying to understand, based on all of this incomplete knowledge, what does our actual picture look like? And here, nobody on earth knows what the picture on the box looks like. And it's really just a best guess and using our principles of uncertainty to convey a lot of that uncertainty. But if we have 7 or 8 metrics and we have a little bit of uncertainty with all of them, but they all appear to be trending in the same way, we can at least make an analysis that points us with some degree of certainty that things are happening in a good direction or a bad direction. And that's really the best we can do right now. And so it really does feel like I'm in my old job, and I'm not an expert in this. I'm not an epidemiologist or anything like that. But I can look at data and evidence and convey uncertainty. I think I'm an expert in that. And so that's sort of where I've put my time, and it helps get me away from my kids for 20 minutes each day when they update the data. So that's been nice.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's about time you have 157 children.
I have 4 under 4. I can go until about 1 p.m. Pacific time today if you need me. So
you had I guess at that time a 2-year-old and then had triplets. Is that what happened?
yeah, he was like 21 months when we had the triplets. So
Wow.
I would highly advise against that strategy of
I'm sorry. I mean, I'm delighted for the children, but this pacing is ridiculous, Jeff.
Jeff, would you say that there's a million things that have gone haywire, or whatever, but in terms of data, shouldn't there be at least some kind of uniform amount of tests given each day if we were only going to have a good idea of the percentage of positives? Some days we might only be, in my area, sometimes it's 10 tests being delivered. I have 1 million people live in my county. So how can we really track that trajectory when the amount of tests being given is so different every day?
Right. Well, and I think that you need a baseline.
Right.
I forget who it is on Twitter that's saying basically we need 22 million tests a day or something like that. And I think in an ideal world, we would. If every person in America were to be tested once every 2 weeks, and I've been tested. My wife got sick a couple weeks back, and so we both got tested, and we were both negative, and that's great. It's deeply unpleasant, but it's necessary at this point that if we really wanted to get a hold of it, we would have an insane amount of tests every day, and that would help us really identify and stamp out any new cases. I think that the strategy is that we can't really, for political or industrial reasons, do that. And so I think that what you need is sort of a baseline, and they've put it at 152 tests per 100,000 people as a minimum baseline for capturing the surveillance on where new cases are developing, and then deploying contact tracing and other techniques that prevent it from growing. Most places don't have that. New Orleans actually has just, that's where we're at right now. And
Wow.
New Orleans is one of the most tested places in America.
Wow.
I think the last week we've been at 150, and it's actually come down to about 150 tests per 100,000 per day, which is great. It's just, can other places manage that? New Orleans was, I guess, fortunate in that respect, in that we had an early outbreak and we had to develop this because we had no other choice.
How are we doing? Like, as someone who thinks about policies, right? I mean, how are we doing as a country?
So I think we in New Orleans are doing well, so that's good.
Yay.
Louisiana's doing well. As a nation, I don't know how well we're doing. There doesn't seem to be much federal leadership, and I think that people are itching to get out, but we don't really have a good handle on the amount of testing we need. We obviously need way more testing, and it's going to be the places that aren't being tested where the next outbreaks are going to occur. And if we open too quickly, and my opinion is this is a lot like the marshmallow test. There's real benefit to us waiting too long rather than opening too soon. And so we need to be patient and not start immediately when it looks like, okay, let's go out. If we wait 2 weeks too long, we get 2 more weeks of economic pain, but we really need the federal government to step in and take up some of that pain. And if we wait 2 weeks too long, then, at least in my opinion, we will reap the benefit of not having to do all of this again in terms of the quarantine. And so I think it's challenging and it's hard, and there's no playbook that we can go by. And I think that makes it really difficult. And so because there's no playbook that says open on X date or here's the metrics we need to hit, we really need to feel like we've gone too far, and then try and
what agency should write that playbook?
That's a good question.
Because we need a playbook.
Well, probably CDC would be the place to start, but we also need economists.
Right.
The disease experts and the economists need to be the people, I think, leading this. And then we need really good data. And the state of Louisiana has been a leader in terms of getting really good data to help us understand the direction. But if you really want to understand, you need really granular data by parish and by county and by zip code. And I hope that data exists somewhere and that analysis is being done somewhere. It's not available necessarily anywhere publicly that you could really do a hardcore analysis and really understand, because if you're going to wait an extra 2 weeks, or if you're going to go into this for a long time, people really need to understand why it's worth it. And for that, you really need the data and the analysis to be publicly available. Because one of the heartening things about this is the degree to which people are willing to accept the quarantine and for the public health standpoint, and to continue that past where it really feels like it makes sense. You really need to be able to make that case with the data, I think.
Jeff, I'm sorry, I'm going to take you down a rabbit hole here, but we have spent 10 years more with warnings about how little data security we have, right? Apple knows everywhere I go. Google knows everywhere I go. You know, I don't have an Apple Watch. People who do are transmitting their heart rate and skin surface temperature and all of these things, right? Those big data companies know who my friends are, what I like to purchase, all this stuff, right? They, in some cases, are listening through the Alexa or whatever, right? So all that is the reality we've had to adjust to. And now, like, having all of our data non-public would be crazy useful, right? If we're doing contact tracing or even just finding out who has a fever, right? Which you could map, that would be kind of handy, right?
Yeah, and
we don't have that data. Like, how do we give it up and not be able to use it? I feel like one or the other should be true, not both.
Well, and I think that there are ways to do it, and I think there are ways to do it that are anonymized and safe, and in a way that you have, you know, you don't want to give it to me. You don't want to
give it to you. It's okay.
Colleagues, I'll take it. It'll be interesting one. But there's a way, I think, to set it up with the privacy standards that make advantage of it, because, you know, Google can use it for advertising. They do use it for advertising. Twitter uses it. Everybody uses it. Why don't we use it for public health to improve our outcomes as a country if it's already being used to improve Google's bottom line?
Preach.
But it has to be done in a way that's transparent and public and private and avoids any type of privacy intrusion. And I have to imagine that's possible. It just takes sort of that foresight and that leadership.
I mean, is this happening? Could this be happening? Are these meetings taking place? You know?
I don't know.
I
hope it is, but I have no.
I think we do know, sadly.
Well, I mean, Apple and Google are collaborating on this giant project that's sort of like this, right?
I meant just for Jeff's playbook. Like Jeff's playbook, this should be part of that playbook, right?
Yeah.
Bring those people in, right, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's only the federal government that can do that sort of effort. I don't know the degree to which that's happening.
We're all doing a really good job being nice. You mentioned, so if we're doing a puzzle with very few pieces and we can't see the box, the pieces, I guess, are sources of good information, right? So this is why I was asking you last week who you're finding useful to read at this point. And you mentioned some names.
Well, I mean, I think 538's been great. We talked about the Nate. I think because he's approaching it from I care about data's perspective and let's look at the data and express our uncertainty. I think I saw there was a piece that 538 did about how hard it is to do models, and they turned it into a comic strip, and I just thought it was brilliant. And full disclosure, I used to write for 538 doing crime analysis, but I thought that this was great because it talks about how you do models and why it's so hard to do one. And basically, like, if you don't know which data points and which variables really matter, and with this, because it's so new, we don't necessarily know that, how do you develop an understanding of how it's going to act? Because if you change even one data point or one variable even so slightly, it may change your entire model. And so if you don't know which ones are truly important, how are you actually going to figure out which ones to learn about and which ones to ignore if they are to change?
Yeah, super cool. And you mentioned Charles Ornstein. I know you're a fan.
Yeah, just with ProPublica, he's just been great. And one of the early adopters of sort of helping to track and developing data sources and understanding trends. There are lots more out there. I'm trying to follow epidemiologists and learn, and most of it is sort of over my head. And I'm trying not to, from my perspective at least, forecast what's going to happen, because that's way out of my league. I think that at least as I approach it, I can see what the data is available, understand what the data says, and assess the uncertainty of how it's being collected and what it actually means. As far as what's going to happen, I'll leave that to the professionals.
Is there a good, so I know we're probably all checking on like our local caseloads, blah, blah. Like, where's the good place to go to get reliable information like that?
Is it covidtracking.com or something like that? It's been good. USA Facts has good data. The IHME model from the University of Washington is, I think, really interesting because it's a public model. They update it, which is great, I think, as we learn more. One of the things with Louisiana is that Louisiana was badly underreporting deaths. There's a 3-day lag, and beyond the lag, they were it was even a longer lag in some cases, and so they reported this huge surge in deaths. And so as you get that information, it's important, I think, to understand if we're going to forecast where we're going. I like that they publish the data and they publish the model, and as things change, we can then compare it. The University of Texas just came out with their own model, which is, let's have as many models as possible and see how we're doing and which one's right, because we don't know which one's right. And as the models agree, it's kind of like hurricane forecasting. The less that your cone gets, the better the models seem to be in agreement. You don't go burn down the models just because there's a big cone of uncertainty. You say that there's a lot of factors that we don't necessarily understand, and that hopefully those will converge and we'll better understand this thing.
Jeff, so I wrote something a couple weeks ago about to win this, we should first visualize what that would feel like. What's the parade going to be like? How are we going to celebrate our heroes? Okay, and that helps people kind of lock in on the day to day. As a coach, I've also often done the alternative, which is imagine we lose this game. How do we lose? What's going to happen for us to lose this game, and how do we avoid it? So as you look at things today, what makes you think, oh my goodness, if this happens, we're going to lose this, and whatever losing looks like. I'd like to know what you think what losing looks like and what might facilitate that.
Are you a Simpsons fan by any chance?
I am. I haven't watched it a long time, but I think it's brilliant.
Homer's the boxer, and Mo tells him to visualize what it's like to beat Frederick Tatum, the champ, like Mike Tyson. And then they cut to Homer thinking about a congenital heart defect, fell Tatum, ring. So that's where my mind immediately went.
Yeah, I like it. We're going to be great friends, Jeff. That's good. Very good.
The victory, I think, is it all has to do with our patience and our willingness to think big. So I think that our victory is in waiting and understanding that we don't have, even if we see cases increase, we're 3 or 4 days behind. So we're really not anywhere close to where we need to be as a nation to really start to open up. And when we do open up, it doesn't mean that we're all going to see the Pelicans game. Right. Opening up means people can go back to work. Maybe daycare is open and we figure out a way to get back to the kids to school so that the parents can start working.
Oh, I see. This whole thing is about getting daycare open. I get it now.
Only thing I want right now.
With a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you got 4 under the $4
raise for the kids' daycare teachers.
Can we just open Jeff's daycare and then we can have a more rational conversation about this?
No, but
what does failure look like?
The other scenario is kind of what these protests and people wanting to open up, and opening up meaning we go back to filling restaurants and movie theaters and and having concerts and thinking that we've won. I think in this case, the longer that we think we're losing, the better we're going to do. And
great point.
Because the data is so imperfect and so lagged, we need to expect the worst outcome and prepare for the worst outcome, and that's probably how we get the best outcome. And again, the best outcome here is probably the economy sucking for a few more months. And if the economy is going to be bad for a few more months, there's only one entity in the country that can help, and that's the federal government. And so our government helping people in a way that they haven't necessarily up to this point, it just has. If we're going to win, that has to be the case. And if we're going to lose, let's make it difficult to support people staying home for a few more weeks or a few more months.
I had a friend, a smart guy, was explaining to me that basically one of the conundrums of he was saying this to me, like, let's say March 1st, maybe, a while ago in pandemic terms. But he was like, if you make the perfect policy, then everybody ends up thinking they've freaked us all out over nothing, right? Because we have very few deaths. If you make, well, anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, Louisiana is going to have done well, and we might have 1,500 people die. As a nation, we could have 60 to 80,000 people die. And based on where we were on March 1st or March 15th, that might be the better outcome. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But what's been interesting is that I think people might get that because the people are responding in such a good way to this point. I mean, you look at the polls, people support this quarantine. It's whether or not once we sort of reach the, well, we overreacted phase, do people suddenly think that the quarantine was terrible? Because if this thing comes back, you know, everyone likes to point to the 1918 flu, the second phase for that worse than the first. And so if we start to get a second phase, are people going to be willing to do this again? It's going to be a much harder sell, I think.
I always forget to tell people how to ask questions. It's an exciting tradition of the show. If you want to ask a question, click the little chat there. And we do have a tradition, which is every show, Gerard comes on video and asks a question, invariably better than our questions. Maybe we should do that now, since we've already used all of your time and your kids are watching, I think, Cars 2, and will expire at some point.
Right. Rebellion's coming soon.
Nice social distancing there, Gerard.
Yeah.
Jeff, that was, listen, we're doing what we can out here in Paris, let me tell you. So you mentioned something earlier, Jeff, and I don't know if I misheard. Did you say that when the more information people had, they thought they made better decisions, but the fact was there was no correlation to that? Decisions were about the same?
Yeah, it's a graphic. I'm sorry I didn't include it.
I can probably find it.
You can. It's about the gamblers and the horse racing. But basically, they asked all of these gamblers to repeat their confidence level of picking a winning horse based on all of this information. And so there were, I think, 20-something pieces of information. And as they gave them more pieces of information, the gamblers said that they were more confident that they were going to get the right horses, but the actual results didn't change at all. And so, you know, if you gave them one piece of information, they said that they were 50% confident that they could guess the winning horse. If you gave them all 20 pieces of information, they were 90% confident they would guess the winning horse, but they were just as good with one piece of information as with 20.
And if you found true, essentially the bottom line is that our decisions, while we all think they're rationally based, they're not, right? No matter how much data we have, they're all emotion, right? At some level, like whether it be how we're interpreting whatever's coming in. I like that, Henry. Whatever's coming in front of us, right? Like I wonder, and I'm a big fan of data too, but is there a way that we can sort of decipher that? Is it really data or is it really emotion that's what's driving these conversations disguised as, well, I read all this data?
Yeah, and I do think data matters, and
Oh, I agree.
I think the important takeaway from that is that we reach a point where we've had what we have. And I think that to your point, that after we've reached that point, then it's sort of the emotion of the decision that maybe takes over. I guess
this word satisficing comes up a lot.
Do what now?
Satisfice?
I'm not familiar with that.
What isn't it in this book? Is this not where I got this from?
Maybe. I took the course 12 years ago, so.
Moving on.
No, Henry, find it, because Jeff, what you're saying is you're not saying that no data affects anything. You're saying there's a level of where the returns begin to really diminish at a significant level. Like we're better to be informed. At some point, it's overkill. It doesn't help at all.
And we've got our experts, and they sort of know the situation. And it's at some point, especially in a situation like this, where we really don't know what's going to happen. At some point, we have to take that leap. And I think that's what makes it so difficult in this situation, is that we don't know what that point is. Right. We don't know when we're going to have few enough cases. Everybody is sort of guessing at what the best way to do it is, but nobody really knows what the best way to do it. And we just sort of have to wait as long as we can and hope that we're making the best choice possible, at least in my opinion.
My understanding of satisficing is like, let's say I'm an NBA GM and I want to pick some guy in the first round, and then the data people come in and have a whole bunch of reasons to do that and to not do that. I think I'm right. The satisficing is basically you just take the ones that you want to hear and say, oh, we satisfied the need to support our decision, right? Like, which I notice, honestly, I catch myself doing this all the time, right? Whatever we think is, we're trying to decide some policy in the house, right? Like, is it safe to do this, or do that, or buy this thing, whatever it is. Like at some point, like you already know, I know what I want to do. And then you just gather to support that, right? And like it's not the same as being super calm, humble, open-minded, and just being open to like, maybe that is a good idea, right? That's a difficult mindset to get into.
Yeah, it's very human, and that's sort of our Intel analysts are humans, and so figuring out how to people like me,
Maybe we should fix that problem first.
It at some point, right? You've sort of heard enough. I think avoiding that type of behavior in the beginning, where you're trying to learn about the subject and build your understanding of it, so that you only take the positive stuff or the negative stuff. That's important. But yeah, sometimes you reach a decision level and you're putting on Cars. Like, stop thinking about the entire library of Disney movies. We're just watching Cars, and that's just what you do. Hopefully they're still doing that.
Seems like it's working. Thank you, Disney. No, Jeff, I want to thank you. A lot of our guests that come on to sell a book, usually it's their book, but in your case, you came on to sell somebody else's book.
Yeah, Hoyer is my great uncle, and so I have a third of all of the profits of his book come to me now.
Oh, cool. Jeff, here's an important question. What is the best beignet in New Orleans?
Oh,
who has it?
Morning Call, which I don't know if it exists anymore, but there used to be a Morning Call in Metairie, and their lease ran out. I used to go there with my grandfather every weekend for 15 years as I was growing up.
Oh, wow.
And there's no line, and I much prefer the Morning Call beignet to the Café du Monde beignet.
Yeah, Café du Monde, thumbs down.
I think the locals would take the Morning Call over the Café du Monde, but that's an excellent question.
Excellent question. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm at Analytics on Twitter if anybody's interested in following me.
Oh, you should definitely follow Jeff on Twitter. Absolutely.
Mostly dad jokes, some now coronavirus, used to be some crime analysis, but
yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jeff. And maybe we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Please.
Right. Okay.